The Abomination of Desolation. This video will discuss what is an abomination in the Bible, supporting Bible verses, the Abomination of Desolation, Antichrist, Lawlessness. An abomination in the Bible refers to something that is utterly detestable, morally repugnant, and offensive to God. It's a strong term used to describe actions, behaviors, or objects that are considered sinful or wicked. Some common examples of abominations in the Bible are idolatry. Worshipping false gods or idols is consistently condemned as an abomination. Sexual immorality. This includes various forms of sexual misconduct, such as adultery, incest, and homosexuality. Violence and cruelty. Acts of violence, murder, and cruelty towards others are considered abominations. Injustice and oppression. Exploiting the vulnerable, denying justice, and oppressing the poor are also classified as abominations. Disobedience to God's law. Breaking God's commandments is seen as an abomination. It's crucial to understand that the term abomination is often used in specific cultural and historical contexts. For example, certain practices that were considered abominable in Old Testament times might be viewed differently today. It's essential to interpret biblical texts within their original context and to avoid applying them rigidly to contemporary situations. Here are some specific examples of abominations in the Bible. 1. Idolatry. Deuteronomy 7 verse 25, "You shall burn their images with fire. You shall not covet the silver or gold that is on them, nor take it for yourselves, lest you be snared by it, for it is an abomination to the Lord your God." 2. Sexual immorality. Leviticus 18 verse 22, "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination." Leviticus 20 verse 13, "If a man lies with a male as he lies with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them." 3. Violence and cruelty. Proverbs 6 verse 17, "A haughty look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood." Exodus 21 verse 12, "He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death." 4. Injustice and oppression. Proverbs 17 verse 15, "He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous, both alike are an abomination to the Lord." Amos 5 verse 12, "For I know your transgressions and your many sins. You afflict the righteous, you take bribes, and you turn aside the poor in the gate from their right." 5. Disobedience to God's law. Deuteronomy 22 verse 5, "A woman shall not wear what is properly for a man, nor a man put on a woman's garment, for all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God." Proverbs 28 verse 9, "He who turns away his ear from hearing the law, even his prayer is an abomination." These verses provide examples of the types of actions considered abominations in the Bible. It's important to remember that the specific cultural and historical context of these verses should be considered when interpreting them. However, God's standards of morality transcend cultural boundaries. What is considered acceptable in one culture may be abhorrent to God. The Abomination of Desolation is a phrase from the book of Daniel that describes the pagan sacrifices with which the 2nd century BC Greek king Antiochus IV Epiphanes replaced the twice-daily offering in the Jewish temple, or alternatively the altar on which such offerings were made. While the historical event involving Antiochus IV Epiphanes was a fulfillment of the prophecy on a smaller scale, Jesus clearly indicated that the Abomination of Desolation would occur again in the future. Here are some possible interpretations. 1. A future, greater fulfillment. Many biblical scholars believe that Jesus was referring to a future, catastrophic event that would mark the beginning of the end times. This future event would be a far more significant desecration of the holy place than what Antiochus did. 2. Symbolic representation. Some interpret the abomination as a symbol of any act or power that opposes God and his people. In this view, the historical event and the future event are both examples of this greater spiritual principle. 3. Multiple fulfillments. It's possible that the prophecy has multiple fulfillments, both in the past and in the future. The historical event was a partial fulfillment, and a greater fulfillment is yet to come. Regardless of the specific interpretation, Jesus' words clearly indicate that the ultimate fulfillment of this prophecy is still in the future. The symbolic interpretation of the abomination of desolation views it as a representation of anything that opposes God and His people. It's a broader concept that extends beyond the specific historical event involving Antiochus Epiphanes. Here are some key points to consider. Idolatry. The most common interpretation is that it symbolizes idolatry, as this was the core issue in Antiochus' desecration of the temple. It represents any form of worship or devotion that replaces or rivals God. Rejection of God's law. It can also represent a rejection of God's moral laws and standards. This could include any societal or political system that directly opposes God's principles. Persecution of God's people. The abomination can symbolize persecution directed against God's people. This could be physical persecution or spiritual oppression. Essentially, the abomination of desolation is a powerful symbol of evil and its opposition to God's kingdom. It serves as a warning to remain vigilant against any force or ideology that seeks to undermine God's authority and the faith of His people. While there isn't a specific name given to the abstract concept of lawlessness, the Bible does describe a figure closely associated with it, the Antichrist. The term Antichrist appears several times in the New Testament, particularly in the epistles of John. This figure is characterized by opposition to Christ and His teachings. While not explicitly stated as the embodiment of lawlessness, the Antichrist's actions and beliefs are often seen as a direct contradiction of God's law. The Antichrist is seen as a direct adversary of Jesus Christ. The Antichrist will claim to be divine but deny the true nature of God. While not explicitly stated as a defining characteristic, the Antichrist's actions and beliefs often defy established moral and spiritual laws. It's important to note that the concept of the Antichrist is complex and has various interpretations. However, the general understanding is that this figure represents the ultimate evil and rebellion against God. Biblical figures related to lawlessness. Belial is not a name but a descriptive term for wickedness, worthlessness, or lawlessness. The phrase sons of Belial is used throughout the Old Testament to describe wicked or rebellious people. They are often associated with idolatry, violence, and disobedience to God's law. This name Beliar is more common in the New Testament, particularly in 2 Corinthians 6 verse 15. While the exact meaning is debated, it's generally understood as a personification of evil, similar to Satan. Over time, Beliar evolved from a descriptive term to a proper name for a demonic entity in some apocryphal and later Christian writings. In summary, Belial or Beliar is a term for wickedness, lawlessness, or evil. Sons of Belial refers to individuals or groups characterized by these qualities. The concept evolved over time, with Beliar eventually taking on a more personal identity as a demonic figure. Initially, Belial was not a name but a descriptive term used in the Hebrew Bible to characterize individuals or groups as wicked, worthless, or lawless. It's essentially an adjective expressing a negative quality. Judges 19 verse 22, Now as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, beset the house round about, and beat at the door, and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, Bring forth the man that came into thine house, that we may know him. The men who refused hospitality are described as sons of Belial. 1 Samuel 2 verse 12. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord. Here, the sons of Eli are characterized by their lack of respect for God. As we move from the Old Testament to the New, there's a subtle shift. In 2 Corinthians 6 verse 15, Paul uses Belial as a proper noun, contrasting it with Christ. What harmony is there between Christ and Belial, or what part does a believer share with an unbeliever? This suggests a personification of evil, a force or entity opposed to Christ. However, it's important to note that this is the only instance where Belial is used as a proper noun in the Bible itself. Compare what Paul says about Belial or Beliar in some translations with what he says about the man of sin or lawlessness in other translations. 2 Thessalonians 2-4, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. For who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, shewing himself that he is God." The concept of Belial continued to evolve in extra-biblical texts. In some apocryphal and later Christian writings, Belial or Beliar is depicted as a demonic figure, often associated with Satan or even as a rival to Satan. In my Wisdom and the Number of Man video, I show how Beliar can be calculated from 666. The link is in the description. Belial originally described a negative quality or behavior. It gradually developed into a personification of evil. Extra-biblical texts further developed the concept into a demonic figure.